gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Jim Parsons.
Welcome. Wait, you guys were all expecting that Jim Parsons, Sheldon Cooper, right? And I mean, North Dakota has an excess of funds, but we weren't about to spend that money on Sheldon Cooper, Jim Parsons. No, I'm the other Jim Parsons with the Fargo-Moorhead-West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. And to keep with the Big Bang theme today, I was asked to be here today as a cameo appearance for the other Jim Parsons. But I do have one other function today, and that is to introduce Andy Peterson of the Greater North Dakota Chamber. So please join me in a warm welcome for Andy Peterson.
All right, Jim, don't go anywhere. Take this coat off because we asked you to dress in a certain way, just like Jim Parsons. Hey, let's hear it for Jim. All right.
And everybody thought I was...
Everybody thought he was dressing down. No, he was dressing the part. I'm Andy Peterson of the Greater North Dakota Chamber. Welcome to the second annual Policy Summit here at the Ramkota. We're going to have a great day today. Now, we want you to use your cell phones today, texting and so forth. All the instructions are on the table. But we want you to turn your ringers off. That's the only thing we want you to do. So when we see your screen operating today, we know that you're interacting with our panel today. So today is all about ideas, right? William James said an idea is first condemned as ridiculous, then dismissed as trivial, then it becomes what everybody knows. And really, when you think about the Big Bang, an idea happens somewhere. And we think that they happen here, and we've got some great panels today. Well, it is my job and my privilege today to welcome to the stage Montana Dakota Utilities, or MDU Resources, and the chair of the board for this year, Jay Scabo, to say a few words. Jay, come on up. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Andy. Wow, these lights are bright up here. Thank everybody out there for coming today. When I was standing in the back, it looked like a great crowd. Right now, I can see absolutely nothing out there. As Andy mentioned, I'm Jay Scabo. I'm with Montana Dakota Utilities. I currently have the honor of being the chair of the board of the Greater North Dakota Chamber. Montana Dakota Utilities and MDU Resources Group would really like to welcome all of you to our hometown here of Bismarck. We're all really proud to call Bismarck our home, and we're very proud to be the champion sponsor of this event today. As the chair of the GNDC board, I'd like to take a moment here to recognize Andy for the work he has done to make this organization relevant again. He and his staff have done a great job putting together events like the one we're having today. He's had some very great successes with similar events in the past. But more than that, he has really made the voice of business heard in all aspects of policy making and other forms of business within the state. So I'd really like to take this time to let's give Andy a round of thanks. So I'd like to welcome everybody to today's event. I'm really impressed that Andy and his team have put together a really good agenda for today that's relevant to all businesses within the state. It's not just kind of a single industry-focused event. It's got topics that are good for everybody. Today's topics are going to cover things like corporate farming, the legacy fund, the views on the upcoming elections. We'll discuss how higher ed can help those of us in the business world. I think that's going to be a very exciting topic. And we'll end with taxes, taxes, taxes. So it sounds like it's going to be a full and active day. As Andy mentioned, I hope you'll all participate. There's the opportunity by cell phone to be able to be an active participant in today's event. And I hope you'll take that advantage of that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the host of the rest of the program, KX News Director and Anchor, Tom Gerhardt.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and thanks, Jay. If you think, I was thinking, if you think these lights are bright, you can come co-anchor the news with me later tonight. We have a lot of these in our studio. Pretty exciting day, and as you've heard already, a terrific agenda. And I know the panelists will not be afraid to ask some tough questions, and I hope that all of you will ask some tough questions too. We'll get to the texting in just a moment, but first, it's my job to thank the sponsors. Without them, none of this would be possible. MDU Resources is a major sponsor today. Also, we have Hess as a big sponsor of today's Policy Summit, several others to go through, Sanford Health, Otter Tail Power Company, my parent company, KX News, proud to be a sponsor. We have Altru, KLJ, Blue Cross, Blue Shield of North Dakota, XL Energy, Basin Electric Power Cooperative, AE2S, Odney, Mid-Continent, Fisher Industries, Steffes Corporation, Kraus Anderson, Cargill, and JLG. Those are our sponsors. Please make sure if you see anyone associated with any of those companies to thank them for helping make today's Policy Summit possible. Okay, you've heard Andy and Jay. Thank you. Some applause for those sponsors. You've heard Andy and Jay mention the texting, and this is a big part of today's summit. And it's a way for you to get involved, to have your questions, your voice heard. And throughout the day, we'll put this up again and remind you, and you probably have some reminders at your table. But when you text in your questions, you're going to text GNDC, then a space, and then your question. Those will come up to our moderators today, Chris Berg and Joel Heitkamp, and they'll be able to take some of those questions and pose them to the panelists. So again, a great way for your voice to be heard, your questions to be put to the test here today in front of our panelists. We're going to go ahead and also following the panels, live polls. So I'd like to test this out. So I ask you to get your cell phones out. As Andy mentioned, please turn your ringers off. But this is just a test question. Is the North Dakota Chamber headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? So the key word you're going to text is, if you think they've hit the bullseye, you're going to text GNDC 1 to that number 22333. Again, if you think they're heading in the right direction, you're going to text GNDC 2 to the number 22333. If they're headed in the wrong direction, GNDC 3, and they're off the rails, GNDC 4, and don't know, don't care, GNDC 5, 14%. So you'll get the idea that this will be a live poll. We'll have instantaneous results following each panel today. So right after the panels are done, we'll pose a question to all of you, and we'll see some live results and get a flavor, I guess, for what all of you are thinking and feeling following these panels. Well, let's get to it. Time for our first panel. We're talking about corporate farming, and it's my honor to invite Mr. Chris Berg to the stage. He's a host of at KVLY, Valley News Live, out of Fargo. Chris?
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. Thanks to everyone for being here. If our guests want to come on up, we're missing a couple of them. So if they want to come up as well, Mr. Watney, also Mr. Erickson, want to join us up here? First off, it is great to be back. I had a chance to do this last year. It was the best event of the year by far. I'm very, very tech inept, so please do what you can to use these texts. Last year I was struggling at the event going, how in the world do I get these questions asked? But we had an absolute blast as people were putting these in. So as we're going throughout these different round tables, if you will, you've got questions. Again, send the text to 2233 and then the GNDC and space and put your question. This will pop up in this iPad. Lee, as I just mentioned, I'm very tech inept, so at some point I'm sure I'm going to need your help with this, but we will get it figured out. We're going to kick off the day talking about the corporate farming law that obviously was passed last session then is referred by the North Dakota Farmers Union. So we've got some very special guests that will share their thoughts on why they're either for or against this corporate farming law. With us this morning, Ladd Erickson. He's here, got some history with hogs, if you will. He might want to share some of that later, but also an attorney. Mr. Mark Watney, President of North Dakota Farmers Union. We've also got Tamara Himes. She's the Executive Director of the North Dakota Pork Council, and then Senator Terry Wanzik, who obviously introduced this bill last session. So what I want to do with each of you is sort of a opening statement, if you will, and share either why you're for or against this particular law. And Mr. Wanzik, since you introduced this last session, we'll start with you, sir.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have the opportunity to explain where I'm coming from on this legislation. And I want you all to understand, you know, I'm a fourth-generation family farmer. We proudly say, my brother and I, that we farm both my great-grandparents' land and our grandparents' land. We're adding the fifth generation. They're expecting me to get home right after this and help combine. So anyway, I know that this is being presented as it's an either-or thing. And I resist that. I believe that this will not threaten our family farms. I've got 3 points that I'd like to make. The number one point is this, in my opinion, will not present any kind of threat to our family farms. It will actually complement them and create a positive opportunity for the family farms that we have here in North Dakota. There were many family farmers that supported this legislation. For instance, the Dairy Coalition, the Pork Council, the corn growers and soybean growers are on record in support. I received a very nice thank you note the other day from the Dairy Coalition for my efforts in supporting this initiative or this legislation. I also received a lot of correspondence from other producers, dairy producers out there that are very concerned about their industry and are very supportive of this effort. To explain where I'm coming from, I have to talk about some facts. Facts are 9 states in the United States have anti-corporate farming laws. And there's only 1 out of those 9 that do not provide some sort of exemption for livestock. The livestock industry, because of the need for economies and scale, that has become very expensive and very intensive in its investment. So that leaves 41 states without any restrictions or any laws whatsoever. Now, having said that, let me talk to you about the U.S. Census of Agriculture. Every 5 years, the USDA does a census on agriculture. And in the last census in 2012, they determined throughout the United States, and remember, there's 41 states with no restrictions, but throughout the United States, 96.7% of all farms are family-owned and operated. Of all the farms, 5.1% are corporate-owned. Of those 5.1%, 90% of those, or 4.5% or 6% of the total, are family-owned corporations. 98% of them have less than 10 stockholders. So that leaves 0.5% of all farms are non-family corporate farms in the United States, even though there are 41 states with no restrictions. So if you look at it, and 90% of those 0.5% are less than 10 stockholders. So if you want to sum that up, there's 1/10 of 1/2 of 1% of all farms that are larger than 10 stockholders in the whole United States that own and operate family farms. So this will not happen in North Dakota. The proof is in the facts of what is happening in the rest of the nation. Walmart or Goldman Sachs is not going to come out here and take control and operate and run our farms. One corporate executive made a statement one time when he was asked, an agribusiness corporate executive, why or when are you going to start buying up the farms? He said, it'll never happen. He said, because we can never exploit our employees to the same extent that a farmer is willing to exploit himself. And I would be a case in point. Yesterday, we found out we have to spray all our soybeans for aphids. And I was out with my son and my nephew and my brother spraying aphids at 6 in the morning. And at 10:30, we left the sprayer, we went to the combines, and we harvested wheat till midnight. I mean, there's a lot of people that won't push themselves through that. And I believe what that statement is saying, those of us in family farming are very passionate about what we do, and we're willing to sacrifice and put a lot more into it than what others will do. My second point I want to make is that North Dakota dairy and swine industries are in serious decline in North Dakota, especially dairy. In 2003, we had 467 dairy farmers in North Dakota. 2015, we're down to, during the legislative session, we're down to 91 dairy farms left, and I visited with the department just today, and they're down to 89, and they're going to lose another one. We're down to 88 then. North Dakota once led the nation in the production of cream, and we had over 500,000 cows in the 40s and 50s. 20 years ago, we had 64,000, 15 years ago, 48,000, 10 years ago, 33,000. Today, we're down to 16,000 cows. Gives you a trend pattern of what's happening. And North Dakota is importing milk to keep its 2 processing plants open. Some of these 2 processing plants, I was told, are 70 to 80 years old. Now, why would anybody invest any more money into a processing plant when we're losing our dairy or losing our cows? In visiting with South Dakota, I visited with their executive director of the the South Dakota Dairy Producers Association, and we patterned this legislation after South Dakota, although we put more restrictions in ours than what South Dakota has. South Dakota has no limit on acreage or the number of acres that they can own or operate. And what's happening is contrary to what everybody believes, and this is what I envisioned, is it will grow more organically. What's happening in South Dakota, according to their executive director, Roger Scheibe, what's happening is their growth is the highest in the nation right now, and they are actually seeing family farmers coming together and pooling their resources that are not related and with local business people and building these farms. An example would be my cousin in North Dakota here just built a dairy barn, new dairy barn for 400 cows, and it's all robotic. He told me it cost him $3 million just to build the barn. And he talked about expansion. Well, under our current law, he and I could be organized as a corporation. My son, he and I could be organized, but the minute we bring both our sons in, we create a problem and we're out of compliance.
Senator Wanzak, I don't mean to cut you off, sir, but we're already getting questions in, so I do want to give our other guests a chance here to speak.
Okay.
We're not going to do Fox News here. We only get 60 seconds, but we do want to keep it kind of tight.
Okay, if I could wind it up with the third point.
Quickly then, and we want to move on to Tamara, please.
I just want to make the third point. There's tremendous potential and economic opportunity in North Dakota in growing and developing our animal agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Tamara?
I'm the Executive Director for the North Dakota Pork Council. I was named to that position in January 1st of 2014. In 2013, the North Dakota Pork Council put together a strategic plan, and in that plan, part of the reason they're saying we wanted to grow the industry, and they looked at the restrictions in the corporate farming law as a hindrance to that. So when Senate Bill 2351 came along, the North Dakota Pork Council unanimously supported a resolution to support that bill. We see nothing but opportunity. Agriculture's changed a lot in the last 5-10 years. In the hog industry, it's changed even more rapidly. Once we see corn and beans have moved north and they've moved west, I think there's more opportunity. We have crushing plants now that are extruding soybean meal. So I think that we're ripe for change, and it's one way that we feel that we could grow animal agriculture in the state of North Dakota.
Mark?
Well, good morning, and thanks for this opportunity. I am Mark Wadney, President of North Dakota Farmers Union. You always start the day out right at my table. We had a little water incident, and they dumped water on my notes, but they're drying out now, and hopefully I don't have to look at them too much, so it's a good start. As you would know, North Dakota Farmers Union opposes allowing corporate farming in our state. For many years, North Dakota has not allowed corporate farming, and it has served our state very well. The success of family farms and ranchers has kept our state and our nation's agriculture economy strong. The connection family farmers have to the land and the farm education passed down from generation to next generation is what makes North Dakota special and economically successful. Our family farm food production system is the envy of the world and is being studied and mimicked by other countries. North Dakota ranks #1 in production in many U.S. crops. Family farms are working in North Dakota. Allowing corporate farming in North Dakota would adversely impact our family farms. It'll make it harder for them to acquire land and make a living as they have to bid against deep-pocketed corporations. And this is really important. You'll read this in many of the money markets and so forth. They're in the news. Pension funds and hedge funds are finding it really a place to put money for long-term growth better than what they can achieve otherwhere. The choice here is really very clear. Do we want a future where a few companies come in, take over, and reap all the benefits, or do we want to continue what is currently working? Having family farms be the stewards of their own land to reap the benefits and keep North Dakota and our agriculture economy strong. Thank you.
Thank you. Lad?
Good morning, I'm Lad Erickson. I had a prior life with what I do now. A couple years I got paid to study hog barn policy and problems in southern Minnesota. That's how I actually got through law school with the funding. Did a lot of field trips down there. And since that time, I've had a few engagements with animal agriculture from a policy point of view. In the mid-2000s, we did some study on trying to use distillers grains in North Dakota to increase animal agriculture feeding. And we looked at the economic potentials for that, have worked on some legislation at the legislature. I don't claim here to be some sort of sage on the hill on these subject matters, but I can identify the issues. And when this bill was coming through the legislature, there's two poles that are always present when it comes to feeding animals in these large confinement facilities. One of the poles was, you're gonna use more corn if you have more animals to feed. It's gonna help your corn to some extent, and soybeans. And Senator Wanzik on the Senate floor did an excellent job articulating that position. Okay, I don't dispute what he said there. The other pole, which was really not touched on at the legislature, but is equally important, was represented somewhat by Senator Flockel on the Senate floor. You want to take hogs out of the bill, and the grounds on that were really what come down to property rights. It was, he made a couple of examples of living 2.5 miles from some hog facilities and hoping that they never get a west wind. And the Fargo Redhawks, when he was involved with that, he talked about telling them, NDSU not to burp their pits because they would ruin the game. Well, if you expand on those two poles and how this stuff lays out, the property rights issue becomes a huge issue out on the ground when you try to cite these in. The large confinement facilities have a tendency to devalue the property around them. And there's a lot on that. I'm gonna give you a couple of Googles here today probably, but one of them that you should check out is how do you value property around hog barns? And the National Realtors Association has an excellent pamphlet on a guide with some really good links, but basically you get in a half mile of them, you're about a 40% decrease in your house value. A mile, which is the extent of zoning in North Dakota, about a 30% decrease in your house value. Mile and a half, you get 20% out to 3 miles where they can't detect a loss of your property value. And the reason that matters is when these things start getting sited in on the ground, you have a massive resistance to them, primarily on property rights. The number one claim in lawsuits by neighbors is property rights. And to get to the Senator Wanzik point, where you're gonna actually see an economic benefit in selling corn by having feeding, you need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hogs, even maybe potentially into the millions. South Dakota corn sellers get a dime, 20 cents off their basis to do that, when they sell corn directly into a feeding operation. We have a corn market here with the Chicago futures and the ethanol plants. And so you really don't realize it until you get huge amounts of hogs, and that has a big infringement on the countryside. And I think our example in North Dakota is gonna play just like South Dakota's. When South Dakota put a corporate farming law in place, it was based on hog barns coming into the state. The rhetoric used during the campaign, which is cited in the court case, was we don't want corporate hog barns, and that passed with a super majority. When the 8th Circuit struck it down, the next angle was to go to county-wide votes, and the first 2 counties to do that were down on the Nebraska border, corn counties, no urban centers, and they passed 80-20, 70-30 to no hog barns, no big dairies. These are corn counties. And then as that happened, they started working their way up, public voting to ban them, started working its way up County 29, so the legislature passed a bill down there. And that bill was to take away the public's right to vote and to limit local control over siting in hog barns, which is a very similar law that we have here in North Dakota now. There's very limited local control. That law got referred. The people got 25,000 signatures, and the legislature reconvened down there to kill their own bill. And since that time, there's been a number of pieces of legislation too complicated to track here, but you can track what's going on in South Dakota by the lawsuits. There's lots of lawsuits in this stuff. South Dakota Supreme Court issued an opinion about a month ago on a county zoning ordinance. They have a 4-mile setback. Again, ours is capped at a mile. And they granted a variance for someone to put in barns 2.5 miles away from somebody. And those people sued. And they ended up losing. The county did have authority to grant that variance. But one of the issues here is we did not address the property rights, the impacts to local people in this bill, and that's one of the main reasons I think it should be referred. Thank you.
I want to get to your questions. Again, I want to remind you, send your text to 22333. Before we get to some of your questions, though, Tamara, I want to give you a chance to respond to what you have to say.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say that I personally will guarantee that if we have a confinement hog operation built in North Dakota, we will not build it a few miles from the Bismarck Airport or within the city limits. That's a pretty specific example. Senator Flacco used it in his debate on the floor. He actually lived about 25 feet from the swine facility when he was the herdsman for the beef unit at NDSU, so he has close experience to it. But that's a 25-year-old system. It's open containment, and we don't build hog barns like that anymore. So we've tried to. There's certainly been problems we've seen, but we try to address those problems. We make corrections, we move on, and then that's agriculture. We always are constantly making changes.
So even with the close, though, can you verify his stats on real estate and pricing and?
No, I can't verify
Okay.
that.
Let's move on to some of your questions, and Mark, we'll go with you on this one. If the swine and dairy producers like this, why is Farmers Union opposed? Mr.
Excuse me, I'm helping with their mic.
So the question is, if swine and dairy,
Also technical.
if swine and dairy producers like this, why is Farmers Union opposed?
Well, not every swine producer and dairy producer likes this. We have had a number of calls from dairy farmers thanking us for referring this, and in their belief, I think they're seeing what actually is happening in South Dakota. You do see increased production, you do see more livestock, or more dairy cows, but they have actually lost their family farm dairies faster than North Dakota. And that's because you consolidate this and you drive it into one system, and they get the better contracts, and the people on the outside lose their. One dairyman called me and said, I sell almost all my milk into the grade A milk market. He said, you allow this to come in, I'm not going to get to do that. I'm going to end up selling into a lower level market, and now I'm going to lose my farm, because what really is pushing this, what's the challenge that these folks have, is the price of their commodity. It has nothing to do with the business model. Nothing to do with that at all. The business model doesn't change the economics of dairy or hogs. It's a pricing problem. So let's work on the problem, not the issue that doesn't make any sense.
Senator Wanzek, you want to respond to that?
I wouldn't agree with that. If it was entirely a pricing problem, why are other states growing? I know one of the examples I shared with you about getting correspondence from North Dakota dairy folks, he sent the latest quarterly report, and he was very disappointed in the fact that every surrounding state of ours, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, are all up in production, and we're down again in the last quarter. So if it's entirely price, how do the other states make it work? And I would argue that it is a hurdle to try and generate the kind of capital that a young family farmer will need to build a dairy. They figure a viable dairy today will take anywhere from $7 to $8 million, and that's not counting the cattle. My cousin, as I told you, built a dairy barn, brand new barn with robots. It's very interesting to see. Even makes me think about getting back into dairy when you got a robot to do the work. But it cost him nearly $3 million for a 400 cow capacity barn. So it is a major hurdle. You know, if we were to change the law to say all young crop farmers out there can only farm the land that they own, they cannot farm anything except what they own, there would be no young farmers even in crop farming. And essentially that's what we're doing in the livestock industry. We're telling these young farmers, you have to own the whole thing, and it's very tough for them to come up with the capital to do that.
Lad, let's go on to this one. Another question that came in. Does corporate farming law provide a degree of safety from court challenge?
Well, there's no laws that are safe from court challenge. This area of law is very complex. It's called the Dormant Commerce Clause or Negative Commerce Clause, and even the justices on the Supreme Court don't agree on what it means. There was a March case that came out, it's Maryland Tax Comptroller versus Wynn, and the four dissenters were Scalia, Thomas, Kagan, and Ginsburg. So how you get those four in the same corral on anything will show you how confusing the law is. It's one of the complaints in that dissent was that the courts are deciding these every time on a case by case. Now Nebraska and South Dakota did have their laws struck. Our law has some differences and distinctions in that from those cases, and those could be significant. I'm not in a position to predict how the justices will think on that. I believe our corporate farming law has earned the right to its day in court based on what it's done for this state, and that if we do get a court challenge on it, we have a very defendable case based on its history. It's already, our corporate farming law, as opposed to those other states that did a measure and then it got challenged, our corporate farming law has been around a long time. It's been to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1945. We have a lot of history with it. And so it is something our Attorney General's office can defend. We don't have a frivolous defense to that law. It's a tough area to make predictions on, but it's worth fighting for based on what it's done here.
Senator Wanzek, I want to give you a chance to comment on this. I just heard what Ladd said that, hey, these swine farms obviously are going to lower real estate values around them, and yet one of the things I've heard from people that are against this is, hey, corporate farms are going to come in, buy up all this land, and obviously make it cost prohibitive for family farmers to go out and buy more land. So those seem somewhat contradictory to me. The question that came in is, how does this newly passed legislation affect land prices?
Well, I don't think it will have much impact at all on land prices. What, again, you're seeing in these other states, including South Dakota, which has no limitation. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands, we did not remove one word from our current corporate farming law, anti-corporate farming law. We just provided 2 exemptions for these specific situations, and we put restrictions on those. What's happening typically is these kind of enterprises, they want to put all their capital into the producing assets, the cows, the barns, and things like that. They're not as interested in buying up large chunks of land and tying up capital into assets that have a lower rate of return. They're interested in the people that want to build these barns that have a passion for dairy want to be dairy farmers. They want to be crop farmers and own a bunch of land. And in a lot of cases, they contract with the local farmers, or some local family farmers in South Dakota actually invest in a dairy farm with another younger partner and help them out in that sense, and also provide the feed and the area for them to spread their manure, giving the farmer a benefit as well with organic fertilizer.
Again, if you want to text in your questions, text them to 22333. Mr. Watney, here's a question that came in for you specifically. It says, question for Mark. As a free market society and one that values competition, can you explain why this exemption will hurt farmers in North Dakota?
Well, you know, even in a free market society, you have government and you have regulations and you have laws that are passed by a majority of the people and so forth. So to think that you can't determine what you want your system to look like is somewhat strange to me, that in a democracy you have that ability. So even though we have that free society, it does make it quite a challenge to not have opportunity for people to purchase and buy land. But with that said, you have to think about it in a bigger picture. If we truly see pension funds and hedge funds, as the stories are told in the papers, purchasing land because it's a better investment, the most opportune time for them to buy them is when you're in a depressed market and land values start to decline. Then they have the ability, because they have cash where the farmers and ranchers don't. And when they do that, they basically tie up that land and make the farmer and rancher now become a laborer instead of somebody that is truly owning the land and teaching their children how to farm that same land and move into the future. So I do believe in a free market society, but I do also believe that you have a certain amount of regulation, and what's in the best interest of the longevity of the land is much better served in family farm agriculture. And tell you what, it's been working for a long time, and it's working quite well today.
So what's your solution if you don't like this, and you look at obviously how dramatically dairy farms have gone down, swine operations in the state? Do you still want to have them in the state?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I am very proud to say of some of the stuff that we've been working on. We did a dairy summit a number of years ago and got some information, and most of it coming out of there was a pricing issue. They said we got to have help with pricing. Well, we all know that the price of dairy has declined dramatically, and right now, of course, it's back up and it's working better. It's a cyclical market. So we went in and we tried to find ways to first, can we get some value added to this system, and can we get the farmers to own the value added? We want to integrate dairies up. This bill integrates down. And if you really want to make money, you diversify. And if you own part of something that is a different commodity, you are less likely to see a decline in the market that impacts you on both ends. So that's a tool. The last thing is we worked with our national organization, and we adopted a margin protection system very similar to a revenue assurance in the last farm bill that's going to stabilize the market movements if the dairy farmers want to purchase that. So we work on that all the time. We also spend a lot of time trying to find avenues to take U.S. family farm food, because we believe it's the best in the world, and run it into markets, educate the consumer, and make sure they know that they need to get a product out of here, which will help, again, once build the markets.
You want something to add, Lad?
Well, yes, the North Dakota's loss in dairy farmers and hog farmers is not unique to North Dakota. All the states in the Midwest are going through that decline. It's not that if you have corporate farming in South Dakota or Iowa, right now Iowa has a record low hog farmers, record high hog production, and that's a similar thing. The difference is they're replacing farmers with these mega feeding operations so they have animal numbers. That doesn't mean they're helping their farm economy or their family farmers in increasing or stabilizing those numbers. And the difference is in North Dakota, you know, we get 8 to 10 cents on a dollar on the hogs because the profit is made where you have processing and you have byproducts industries. And that's where the multipliers happen through Hormel or southern Minnesota and stuff. In our scenario, if we put in those big hog barns, we get that 8 cents on the dollar. Other states get the multipliers on it. So it's not a good economic scenario for us.
Senator, I think you had something else to add. You talked about diversifying, Mark, and I guess the thing I keep hearing is economies of scales in the dairy and obviously the swine business. So when you say diversify, what did you mean specifically, and is that obviously doable when you've got to have the economies of scale?
Well, I think there's going to be some pretty good partnerships made between dairy farmers and grain farmers. I think they can add value. I think there can be partnerships with supplying processing plants. There's new concepts. The consumption of milk has went from 1.4 cups a day down to 0.8. We have to find new uses for it. We should be searching out plants that do that. Wisconsin, where the dairy's big, they live very close to large urban centers. They have a disadvantage or advantage over us because we don't have the population centers to serve that. So we have to come up with different and unique ways. But you got to put some numbers to this thing. I was told by what I consider a pretty good expert in the dairy business that it's about $5,000 per dairy cow. So when somebody says $7.5 million to build a dairy operation, we're talking 1,500 cows. And I don't know any business or any farm or any place where a young individual could come in and all of a sudden start a 1,500 dairy herd and he would find money. Now, robotics, everybody's fearful that that's so expensive, yet the Farm and Ranch Guide recently had an article of a gentleman in Minnesota that said he just added robotics to his farm. The robotic system he used, and I don't know how many different types there are, but the one he used handles 60 cows. So he doubled his herd to 120. He's got robotics on 2 sets, able to 60 cows each, and he appears to be making it work. You know, you can't say that somebody's going to go into 1,500 dairy. not without the help of their father or their son or their mother or somebody to help them get through. They have to. You have to start small. That's in all small businesses. You don't get to go and start with the top. You can't go out into a wheat farm and automatically assume that you're going to start with 5,000 acres. You can't do that. First of all, you probably can't find the land to purchase. And second of all, you would never be able to cash flow it right out of the gate if you financed the whole thing. So let's talk some real numbers here. Let's not be blowing through the roof. And there's farmers, dairy farmers out there that have robotics that are not 1,500 head.
I just want to say something. There's nobody here from the Dairy Coalition today, but although milk consumption, fluid milk consumption has gone down, we've actually seen tremendous growth in yogurt, cheese, and those kind of products. So I just wanted to correct that. And I also like diversification, even though that's saying the way to be profitable. That's certainly not what we've seen in agriculture. We've seen more specialization. My background's in the beef cattle industry, and we've seen lots of diversified farmers and cow-calf operators disperse the cows and just focus on farming, or disperse the farming operation and focus on cows. So I don't know that that's true. And I just want to mention, in case I don't get a chance to say this again, but it takes about $50 million to build a hog operation, a 5,400 sow operation. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, but that's certainly a lot of capital for one person to raise on their own. And this corporate farming, the exception would be able to give, we actually have 2 operations in the state of North Dakota that operate as cooperatives. And this is hindering their ability. They'd like to go in business with a genetic company so they could provide breeding stock for their operation and increase their biosecurity. And for most people who don't know this, we're basically primarily a farrowing state where we use sows and farrowing operations. We don't finish very many hogs here. So I know that North Dakota's kind of green when it comes to hog production because it's changed so much, and we didn't always have a lot because we didn't have the corn and the soybeans that we do now. So there's been a lot of changes.
Tamara, hold that thought. Lee or Sean, can I get some help with this? We're getting some great questions, and they're going down so fast, they're not showing up on here, and I want to make sure we get to the audience's questions as much as possible, please. So with that being said, you look at our state, obviously, with a state-owned bank, state-owned mill elevator. Is there a place for the state to possibly step in and help support the industry in some way, shape, or form, in your opinion?
Well, I think what we've done for the last 20 years is we've formed committees and we've got working groups, and that's all we've done is sit down and talk about how we're going to grow animal agriculture in the state, but just nothing happens. I've heard a lot of people say, well, the Bank of North Dakota. I don't hear anybody from the Bank of North Dakota saying, come into my office, I have $15 million to help you build a barn. I guess I would like to hear more from them what they could do. I guess they've been pretty quiet as far as what the opportunities are in that realm.
And Senator Wanzak, that leads me to you, and that was a great setup. Thanks, Tamara. In a piece that you wrote back on June 23rd, you talked about Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska's hog business, saying that each hog generates approximately $1,000 of economic impact per year. So as a state lawmaker, is there a place for the state bank to step in and help support the hog industry? And how specifically?
Well, I think where they could help is providing financing for operations, just like they do with beginning farmer programs and many of the farm loan programs that they have. They could provide that kind of assistance, in my opinion. But if I might comment, following that up with something that was said earlier, I think we have to understand it's a natural evolution. Our farms are getting larger. The economies of scale matter whether you're going to make a profitable enterprise or not. I would agree with Mark that, I don't expect young farmers to come in and build a 1,500 head dairy, but I think he was making my point when he was talking about, them working together with a crop farmer. The problem is, though, we need the tools, the very same business tools that the rest of the business world uses in accomplishing that. How are you going to provide a succession plan on a dairy? Take, for instance, the one that I talked about with my cousin. Say he wants to expand and build another barn beside it and form an LLC or a sub-S chapter corporation, and comes to me and my son, he and his son. I'm 58, he's 59. I'm not going to be involved with this very long. It will eventually fall down to our 2 sons. They legally cannot be partners within a corporate structure. And I will still contend that this law change will not impact one of our family farmers. It will not negatively displace any one of our family farmers. As a matter of fact, I think it can create a lot of great opportunity, just like South Dakota is experiencing. They're seeing mostly organic growth. They're seeing situations like mine where I could invest with my cousin and our two boys and maybe a neighbor farmer and build up a dairy and build a little market for our own commodities that we're growing on our land right in our own area and not depend on spending $1 a bushel to ship it outside of the state. It will present opportunities. I just feel while the opposition sees nothing but fear, I see opportunity.
So with that, Bill, I didn't get a clear answer from you. How specifically can the state bank step in then and support this industry?
Well, they could provide financing of some sort to this entity, along with the equity that they're going to place in this industry or this enterprise. I'm assuming it's still going to take a lot of financial or financing of maybe a little more riskier entities that maybe are having a little bit of trouble with the commercial market, or they could also, like they do in other cases, actually co-op with a commercial lender and helping put together an operation or a project, and in that sense is where I would see them coming in.
Tamara, I don't see a glowing smile. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the question still hasn't been answered. I don't know what the Bank of North Dakota can do.
Any other suggestions, Senator?
I'm not sure what they're looking for here. I guess what the bank does is administer loans, makes loans. That's about the extent to where I see they can help. And we've tried over the years in providing some lower interest loans. One thing the South Dakota Executive Director, if I may, said to me, and I asked him point blank, did this make a difference? He said it was a game changer. They were in decline, their production was in decline, their cow numbers were in decline, and since then they've been the fastest growing state in the production of dairy. Matter of fact, they went from 80,000 when the law changed to up to 110,000 cows right now, and I believe they have 15,000 more that are going to be permitted. And he said, his statement to me was there was virtually no out-of-state investment. It all is coming within organically, which is contrary to what you hear, that Goldman Sachs and Monsanto are going to come in and buy up all the land. That's not going to happen. Matter of fact, we put a restriction on the law. Any corporation that wants to have, comply with this exemption is limited to 640 acres owned or leased. That's owned or leased.
I understand that, Mark. I want to give you a chance to respond to that because many people are saying, hey, that's just the foot in the door. Once they get the foot in the door, now we'll move to, 1,280 and so on and so on. You say what to that?
Well, it's really hard to predict who's going to finance these and who's going to be the investors and so forth. I think we have a system that works. We have a challenge with commodity prices. I think when you suggest a small exception, you can't ignore the fact that there was many people that after this passed were stating, I wish we would have went all the way. So we have to be a little careful on what the direction heads if we move forward, because most of the folks that testified for this said, well, if this has anything to do with anything more on land, I'm not interested. But they forgot about the fact that you can form a domestic corporation after domestic corporation after domestic corporation. So there's no real limitation there. The Secretary of State's office really struggled trying to determine how are we going to monitor this, which then required a few amendments to come in. So I think we got to be extremely careful. I don't know why we would change something that is working so well. Yes, farms are growing.
But I wouldn't say dairy farmers are saying it's working so well.
The system does not work for animal agriculture.
Right, that's what I'm getting at. And so you keep talking about commodity prices. What's your solution? I mean, North Dakota in itself isn't going to change commodity prices, so what do you do?
The consolidation that we see in agriculture has continued for a number of years. That is true. But the fact of the matter is, it's a pricing issue. You have to figure out ways to increase price. So you're telling me if you change the business model to a corporation, all of a sudden the economics work? That's silliness. You're telling the 91 dairy producers out there right now that they're not good enough to do it, so we're going to make a business?
But according to Senator Wanzek, it's clearly working in other states. So it must have some.
But I think the family dairy farmers out there now have to have a great round of applause because they've survived some of the toughest things they ever could, and they're making it work. You are telling me that they're not good at what they do, and that's bold.
That's not what anybody
Yeah, exactly.
I completely disagree with that, but we are looking at a situation, like I said, there's not an expert here from the Dairy Coalition, but we are looking at a situation where if the numbers keep dropping, we're gonna lose our processors, and these family dairy operations that are doing a great job. I live in New Salem, I live in one of the highest concentrated dairy areas in the state. I've seen them go, and they're gonna have to go because of no fault of their own, because they have nowhere to take their milk. Or else they'll have to expand to at least 600 cows so they can fill a tanker full of milk to go to Minneapolis. And that's what's gonna happen.
So with that being said, Senator Wanzek, should the state then own a dairy processor?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that right now. As we're losing dairy cows, we want to invest in a dairy processing plant?
I'm just saying, we own a
Doesn't-
bank and a mill. I mean, I'm just asking the question to say, what can we do? Because he's talking about commodity prices. We're
Well,
not
you
gonna
know,
change
I
that.
would agree with Mark in the sense that it isn't just the corporate structure on its own that is going to change things. I mean, if you're a sole proprietor, you could build a barn, but you better have a lot of money. You got to have a ton of money, and it's just a high cost intensive enterprise. And part of the reason, you know, with the corporate structure, and I think of my own situation, the reason it appeals to me, if I'm going to invest in my cousin and we're going to expand his dairy and work with him, I don't want to risk my whole farm. I'll risk $500,000 and, you know, and make an effort to help him. But if without that structure, without those business tools, a lot of you who are in business understand why you incorporate your business for tax reasons, succession planning, liability reasons, whatever. Why can't we give the same tool to our family farmers? And remember what I said in the beginning, 96.7% of all farms in the United States are family owned and operated. Less than 0.1% are non-family corporate operations with more than 10 stockholders. It's not going to happen. It's going to be local family farmers that utilize this tool.
Lad, I want to move on to you. I was speaking with a dairy farmer down in Lisbon, and he said the way the law currently is, not this new one, but currently is, he may have to end up dissolving his business within 20 to 30 years, the way his business is structured now. With the new law, he's obviously got a lot more opportunities, which also brings me to, you look at North Dakota's pharmacy law. I've talked to some pharmacists that say, look, I'd love to sell my business, but I can't because of these laws. So your thoughts on what he had to say?
You know, I hesitate to venture into dairy because I've never had a personal experience working on that. You know, I had the hog background, or just studying that. I read through 200 pages of legislative testimony, and a vast majority of it, I couldn't understand the proponents of the bill. It seemed like they were arguing for the current law. In other words, we have ways of capitalizing operations under the current law. The 81 amendments to the corporate farming law expanded the ability to raise capital. We have the LLC angles. Basically, the arguments there were for the current law, even though they were arguing for the bill. I don't see that. And if you look at the way, like I said, these other states that are increasing their animal agriculture numbers are not increasing their producers. And that's a big misnomer, is like, hey, we need this to save our dairy, save our hog producers. That's not what this does. This bill is an open-ended bill. March Fortune did an excellent article on the economics of hog production, okay? And it's about how the meat packers are trying to drive out the family corporations. And it's a good piece to read for everybody that wants to look at the economics of this. So I don't know what the specific person said on the dairy, and I'm not going to delve into it because I don't have that personal background.
But from a legal standpoint, I mean, is there any credence to what he said?
The tools we have, the way I read the legislative history, would answer the questions people when they're supporting the bill for.
Okay.
You know, I didn't understand that.
We've got 5 minutes left. I do want to give each one of you a minute for kind of a closing statement. Before we get to that, Mr. Watney, quickly if you can, one of the questions that came in, obviously you guys have referred this. It's going to be on the ballot for the people of North Dakota in 2016. Let's say that you end up sort of winning this battle, if you will. What specifically, quickly if you can, will you do then to help, obviously, hog and dairy producers?
Well, we will expand on our efforts through the federal government to try to make avenues to help them be able to stabilize their pricing and be able to find a way to fit their costs with the system. We already work on a lot of value-added projects. We'll work with them. We've been out and attended one dairy we met with just yesterday. We're reaching out, trying to find out. We've been attending some of the events they're holding so that we can hear and understand what they're after. So we'll work hard. And we think the family farmers will come together and we'll find a way of doing it.
Thank you. We've got 4 minutes left, so I do want to give each one of you 60 seconds for kind of a closing statement. Senator Wanzek, we'll start with you, sir.
Okay. Well, I hope I at least presented to you that I do have the same passion for family farmers that Mark does. And I compliment the Farmers Union and their zealous protection for family farmers and looking out for family farmers. However, I just feel differently in this particular issue with him. I feel rather than it being a negative to family farms, it could be a positive. It can complement them. It's not an either-or situation, especially when you consider we had 91 out of 30,000 some family farms in North Dakota that are actually in the dairy industry, and I have not run into one of them that have expressed their dissent against this effort. So again, we need to help these family farmers that ask for this, that are in these industries, and help them find a means or ways to capitalize their industries and see it thrive here in North Dakota. It could be a huge economic gain and revitalize rural communities, in my opinion.
Thank you, sir. Tamara.
Well, as a state, we've always supported value-added agriculture when it comes to crops. And one way to add value to crops is to feed it through livestock. So what I hope to see is that the state will get behind a value-added situation with animal agriculture as well. We have a large operation in Candu. They employ 50 people, and that's a pretty large employer in a city the size of Candu. And probably there's some small family farmers whose spouse or son might be working in theirs while they try and build equity in their place. So I think there's nothing but opportunity. We're an untapped resource because of the way agriculture has changed in our state in the last 5 years. So I think when you sit down at the table with someone, with both internally and externally, people who would like to come in and build a sow operation, and they say, well, when you get your law changed, we'll be here. Well, and there's angles, that's right, and that was a key word there. There's angles to make it work, but they don't want to use angles. They want to come in legally, they want to be welcomed here, and I think that through this law would be one way that we could grow our industry. And we're not going to see, it's not going to be like Iowa, don't get me wrong. I mean, we're a long ways away from processing facilities. There are some setbacks in that, but we are an untapped resource geographically. We're a biosecurity utopia, and they know that, and that's why they'd like to come here, a handful. If I would see 4 or 5 barns, I would be ecstatic. That's what I predict.
Thank you. Mark.
Well, I think it's important for people to understand how the Farmers Union works, because at times there would suggest that I get to pick and choose what our policies are. We have a number of members that come into our organization. We start at the 40,000, 41,000 family memberships. They elect delegates and come to a convention annually. We have had delegates that are dairy producers. We have had people on our policy committee that are dairy producers. We also have hog producers as members. They have every opportunity to change our language and to participate. We do not hear this issue coming to our membership and to change our policy. So we have to make the assumption our members don't like this. And it's not an assumption because they write it right into the rules. So I will just reinforce that family farm agriculture is working. It does have to deal with the ups and downs in the markets. We're price takers. I wish we could do it differently, but that is a reality of being in agriculture. Demand and our ability to overproduce supply is amazing. We are so good at what we do, we flood markets even after we meet the needs of ethanol and energy and ethanol and food. And the challenge we face is that when the price of food goes down, I don't think anybody in this room adds another meal. You just don't have the ability to clear your market out just simply because the price comes down. So we have to figure tools of how we get around having lower prices in them downturns so we can survive to the good turns. And there's nothing different about that. It's just the way it is. And I gladly will try to figure out how to help it. Not sure the answers are that easy, but we need to study the market. We need to try to do what we know best. That's family farming.
Mark, I don't mean to cut you off, sir, but we're trying to limit this. So I got about 45 seconds for you, lad.
You know, Chris, I can't improve on what Mark just said. I'm going to rest on what he just said.
Well done. To all four of you, thank you. We're going to take a quick poll, so if you'll stay put until the poll is taken. You can see the results up on screen. I believe Mr. Gerhardt's going to come up and take things over, and we'll be back with Joel Heitkamp in probably about, what, 5-10 minutes maybe?
Yes,
Thank you, sir.
we're going to make a pretty quick transition. Thank you, Chris, and thanks to our panelists. Great to see the passion come through. Please give them a round of applause. I'll have a couple of announcements here in just a moment, but first we do want to get to our question. And just before that, there's a little trouble with the internet here in the hotel, so stick with us. Please keep asking your questions. We're hoping they'll all pop up during this next session. So the question: do you support the repeal of the corporate farming law as passed in the 2015 legislative session? Again, you text to 22333 on your phone, and if yes is your answer, it's GNDC 6, no GNDC 7, and you can see the live results. Also, as you noticed to my right and to your left, there's a table with coffee and water and some other things if you'd like to help yourself to that. As Chris mentioned, we're going to take a quick break. Don't stray too far from your seats. We'll put a timer back up on the screens here to let you know when it's time to return to your seats. And then we'll get on with the program. Joel Heitkamp will be the moderator of our next issue. We also want to alert you, if you haven't seen in your programs, to activate your Twitter accounts and use the hashtag NDSummit to send your thoughts and opinions out in the Twitter world. So our first poll, 37% yes, 63% no.